why not tonight? I was ready to go. Why not this morning? That's what I'm talking about. That's crazy. I saw that and I thought, Mitchell, what are you doing? I love the song, but tonight? I'm just kidding, but I got to say this. I finally have my VBS experience at Valley View, and I think Charlotte's over here. She skipped out last Sunday morning because she doesn't like the acknowledgement. Everybody turn and stare at Charlotte right now, and let's wave and say thank you, Charlotte, for VBS. What she did, see? Yeah, okay. She's just having a conniption over here. But I got to tell you, as much as the Rothies and Charlotte put into it, there are so many behind-the-scenes people that we'd be amiss not to say thank. I was just this is how I knew how serious you were. Becky Mulholland was back there she's doing these cookie things in the kitchen back there, and you know, kids have to have cookies. So do adults, but they separated the kids' cookies from the adults' cookies, and I didn't understand why. And there was one on the kids' little basket that I wanted that wasn't on the adult one. So I go and I take one out of there, and she gives me this look that's awful and hits me real hard and says, "Don't take the kids' cookies." Valley View's serious about VBS. Next year, she's putting Cookie Nazi on a t-shirt, and she's going to run the kitchen. That's when I knew this church is serious about VBS. But there were people back there. There were people leading kids around. There were people teaching these rambunctious kids who'd just been sugared up. You all are my heroes. You guys are as important as anybody to that. But it took a village. It just took a church to pull that thing off. And it's an amazing thing, and it's important, and I'm grateful for what you did. Next Sunday, just kind of as an advertisement, we've been doing this There's a Reason series intermittently through the whole year. Next week, we're talking about There's a Reason Why at Valley View Church of Christ we practice male spiritual leadership. We're going to be presenting the argument for why we do that, giving you reasons for that. And there are those that say, well, you know, people have questions about what we do. So if you know somebody who's always wondered why we don't have women preaching and stuff like that, please come next time, because it's not as we are often presented as believing. And I want us to know exactly why we do this and why it's important and central to us. So that's for next Sunday. After this evening, Jonathan's we're going to pound him at 4, and then he's going to preach tonight. I'll be at church camp. I'll be preaching too, but to a bunch of young people in the heat. And so at church camp, I love it because time means nothing. We don't know what's going on in the world, and phones don't work. It's heaven on earth. Anyway, be making your way to Luke chapter 14, if you would. Luke chapter 14 will be for our text this morning. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me, the Bible tells me so. What do you need to be able to make a decision? Big or small? I'm one who hates having to make decisions. It takes me forever. I'll stretch the boundaries of reason to make a decision. You can ask Melissa about this, who will try to argue I had to propose 3 times to get her to marry me. Not because I was questioning her, but marriage. But anyway, don't ask her. I don't want to go through all that again. Valley View elders will tell it took forever to make a decision. Don't talk to Paul about that. I don't want to go through this again. It takes me forever to decide on a lawnmower or a car. I just got to look at everything and overanalyze, and it is absolutely painful. I just as soon go to McDonald's and them hand me a tray full of food instead of answering the 80 questions to be able to figure out what you want. Questions, decisions, making a choice about options that you have. Do you like this? Most people I've found don't. I was in front of a lady at Walmart the other day, and she had her kids with her, and they asked what's for supper. She said, "I'm so tired of that question." Because as soon as she answers, I don't want that, I don't want that, I don't want that, and all of a sudden the decisions to be made. Going with a woman to pick out clothes. This is why guys have benches at malls. These decisions to be made. You watch a show, Say Yes to the Dress, and I know it's only an hour long, but I guarantee it took months for that girl to finally say yes to that particular dress. We've got these decisions, and I know this happens in Jonesboro, though it shouldn't. In Kennett it does. We've got 5 or 6 restaurants you can eat on a Sunday morning after church. So we get in our car and we drive through. We got Noah and Abby in the back, and Melissa's driving, and I'm beside her. Let's go out, okay, let's go somewhere. We drive all the way through town looking at all the options we already knew were there. Well, none of that looks good. Let's go back again. We drive through again. All the options we already knew were there. Can't make up our mind. We turn around. What is it? And in Jonesboro, you do this too, even though you have so many on every street corner. Can't make up our minds. Some of these decisions just simply don't matter. Why we spend that much time, I'm not sure, but then some of them do. Who you marry does matter. Take some time. Where you live, what you'll major in, what college you'll go to, these are big questions, but none bigger than what are you going to do with Jesus? And the reason I say that is because it settles so many other questions. Once you make Him Lord of your life, a lot of the other questions you have to ask yourself are no longer on the table. They've been decided. So what are you going to do with Him? How do you make this decision of, do I accept Him? Do I become His servant? Do I make Him Lord of my life or not? Every sermon makes you have to think about a certain aspect of this. We come to the end of every sermon, and we have, at least in churches of Christ, this thing called the invitation. Sometimes, quite frankly, it has nothing to do with what we talked about, but we have to offer it. So we have this invitation where we urge you, consider what you'll do with Jesus. And we open up our songbook and we sing a particular song that makes you question it. And then you have some moments to decide, how am I going to respond to what's just been talked about this morning? And you make a decision one way or another about whatever the topic was. Hardest part of the sermon to prepare. You want it zeroed in, focused. You want it spot on. You want it as narrow as you can get it to make people think as clearly as they can. And I've taken classes. How do you write this thing? And it's the hardest thing to write. And it's to clarify why they should respond in a certain way to what's been said. And so we're going to talk about this morning is just invitations, how Jesus offered them. The most famous one is in Matthew chapter 11. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. It's a very sweet, compassionate, tender, and gentle invitation offered to people with broken hearts trying to find the way to God, but everybody's gotten in the way, and all these religious bullies are presenting obstacles to them, and they just want to know, how can I have what Jesus has to offer? And Jesus says, it's simple. Just come to me and accept my yoke, which is tender and gentle, and I'll help you with the rest of your life. And people come forward, and there's a soft invitation. Oh, why not tonight? Or, oh, why not this morning, if it's more appropriate? And there's this gentle song, and people come forward. It's a beautiful invitation, but also the most rare. As we're looking in the book of Luke, especially chapter 14, Jesus is not quite that way in Luke. You may remember when the rich ruler comes up, what must I do? I lack something. Well, these are commands. Well, now go sell everything that you have and give to the poor and come follow me. And he doesn't. He walks away. He doesn't come forward. He goes out. Forget it. No response that day. Then think of the others. That was Luke chapter 18. Then you got Luke 9. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever will save his life must lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. Where's the compassion in that? There's no reports of baptisms there. There's this awkward silence and the sound of crickets. Nobody goes forward that day. Or a little bit later when he says, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but come to the Son of Man who has nowhere to lay his head. Makes you want to run up the aisle. He intervenes he stops the invitation song and says, come follow me and be homeless. Be homeless. No invitations listed on the wooden board in the back. When the church secretary printed out the bulletin, no responses from that Sunday morning. Why in the world would it be so gentle and compassionate one time and so rough the next? There's a couple of things that have to be accomplished, it seems to me, in an invitation. One is we need to share what Jesus offers. There's a lot that you get. There's a lot that you get that's a benefits from coming to Jesus, and that's what Matthew 11 was about. These people needed to hear what Jesus had to offer, and they wanted to. And they couldn't go to the Pharisees and find out, and they couldn't go to the religious leaders and find out, so they had to come to Jesus, and Jesus was more than willing. And so he says, here's what you get. You get this yoke that's gentle and tender, and you get me helping you. And they're excited about that. But in this one, in Luke chapter 14, where we are in our text, there's these great crowds following him, and he turns to them and puts a big, huge, wet blanket on this great movement he's got going. He drives some of them away because he says, not only must you know what Jesus offers, you must also know what Jesus demands. You've got to know that too. Because sometimes following Jesus seems so culturally acceptable. It's like the hip thing to do. Coming to church is no big deal. It's almost social advantageous to you to be able to come to church. It's the hip thing. It's so much like Academy Awards when the guy gets up and I thank God that I won this award. Now the role that he's winning it for had 12 illicit sex scenes and God's name taken in vain 33 times. But I'm going to thank God for this award. That's a cheap following. And a lot of times, actually, when you've grown up in the church, it's pretty easily, well, it's 11 years old, time to be baptized. And you don't have to think a lot sometimes of what it demands. Jesus knows something that they don't know. Since chapter 9, verse 51, Jesus has been making his way to Jerusalem. He's no longer in this area of where he grew up, doing miracles and teaching great lessons and just fascinating people. Now he's walking toward Jerusalem. And do you know what awaits him in Jerusalem? No, you as a follower do not. These followers think it's always going to be this way. He's going to do great miracles. He's going to change the world. He's going to defeat the Romans. And now we're moving. We're going to move up in the world and we're going to be the world leaders. No. Jesus says, I know what's ahead. What's ahead is Jerusalem. What's ahead is opposition. What's ahead is people hating my guts and spitting on my face and putting me on a cross. And by the way, that's what awaits you too. And as he's going, he's saying, these great crowds, I love having great people following me. And a big crowd. Oh, Valley View, we want 10, 9, 10, 100, right? 1,000, 1,100 people. I want true followers, not just great numbers. God, Christ, Jesus was not about the great crowd. He's about the great disciples, the ones who know trouble's coming, but they're willing right now to prepare for the trouble that's coming. And so he's trying to prepare them for a day that's coming that he knows is ahead, but they don't. Casual, laid-back discipleship will not do in this world we're living in. You can't just be here when it's popular. You got to be sober and focused. Maybe we view the Christian faith way too casually. We need a strong, clear discipleship call that tells us what Jesus demands. And so that's what Jesus does. He does tell them what he offers, but also what he demands. So these great crowds that are following him, he extends the invitation. He turns around and tells them, if anyone comes to me, you really want to follow me, and here's the deal. You have to hate your father, your mother, your wife, and your children, your brothers and sisters, and even your own life. That puts a damper on the excitement of this great crowd. It's not what I wanted to hear on Sunday morning. I want to come here and feel good. And you're telling me I got to hate my family. I know. Jesus isn't all he appears to be sometimes. At least how we are taught to see him. I want you to notice some things about how Jesus does this. Number one, he says there's no small print here. It's like a sunshine law. I got to tell it all, right? We hate small print. Small print is this very small description of all the obligations that have come along with this contract, but it's smaller than all the wonderful things about the contract. You see the big print, it catches your eye, and you say, oh, that sounds nice, and what you don't see is in minimal view, there's this description of what it's going to cost you. And you sign on the dotted line for the big print, and later on you read it and you go, oh my, I didn't realize that all this went with it. We've tried to eliminate these in the world we live in. We got drug commercials, these great drugs that fix that infection underneath your toe. You've got that, and wonderful, it'll take that out. But and then at the end of the commercial, in real fast words, the guy comes on and says, oh, by the way, it will help that infection, but it's going to shrink your liver, put permanent scarring around your belly button, and take out your right eye. I think I'll settle for the toe infection. That's what I want to say. Because we put that in small print. Now, legally, you have to say it on the commercial. Jesus is not forced by anybody. He comes out and he says it. Congratulations, you're going to be senior class sponsor. I've made note of this before, which sounds great because it sounds like you're popular, but it also going to demand some extra time for you. What about this one? You go to a place like Branson or Gatlinburg. Come by, we'll give you free tickets to this show and this show as long as you sit through our spiel for the great getaway resort timeshare. I'd rather eat off my right arm and pay twice the price for that ticket than to sit through that junk. You ever done that? I did that once. I've repented and done therapy. There's another time this happened to me. This lady calls up and says, we want to show you this vacuum cleaner. We just want to clean one room of your house, one carpeted room of your house. You just pick one, and it won't take very long at all. She got there at 6 and left at 11. My bedtime is 8:30, and I was really irritable by the time she left. And the next time they called, I picked it up, said, no, thank you, and hung up and didn't say another word. It always costs more than you think. You ever notice that? It costs you a little more than you think. Not so with Christ, because he comes out and he says, you got to hate your mom and dad and your brother and your sister and even your own kids and even your own life. You got to take up a cross, which is the sign of capital punishment. You got to count the cost to make sure that you can pay it. And you got to give up all your possessions. No small print here. I'm not trying to talk you into something you shouldn't do. No one can ever claim that he tried to talk us into discipleship without laying out the requirements. He tells us exactly what they are. And so when we talk about the Christian faith, we must never relegate the demands of the Christian faith to small print so that people later on say, you tricked me. Jesus won't do it. We can't do it. If you're going to have to hide some truth to get people to respond that accept no responses, we cannot hide the truth. It must be said. And if you look around, I feel like sometimes we've accommodated truth over the years. I remember as a kid playing, we never played on Wednesday nights ball, never on Sunday, Wednesday nights, but once in a while they do a makeup thing, and you'd be going up, you're playing, and it's about time for church on Wednesday night, and Mom and Dad would pull me out of there. I did the same with my kids. Right up to 10 minutes till. We got to go. We pull them out. The team has to take an out now. How many remember these days? Am I the only one? Raise your hand if you remember those days. What's changed about the gospel that's no longer important? Now if you put a game on Sunday morning, you'll skip church completely for the ball game. Where is the commitment? He told us you got to do this. When it comes down to it, lordship here or the world stuff here, you got to choose lordship. What happened to that? We don't talk about it anymore because parents will get upset. Jesus talks about it. And if your kids hate you because of the commitment you make them practice, that's a cost of the faith. I don't know where over the years that suddenly became unimportant. Now I'm meddling. I got people looking at me mad. I think people come, and a lot of times we try to make the life of faith so accessible like consumers and so affordable that we cut out some things, and later it comes as a shock to people. You expected me to be there on Wednesday nights too? Seriously? I know. we tricked you. We should remove every barrier that's not necessary, but we should not remove a single one that is. And the Christian race has some tough hurdles in it, and nobody, elder, preacher, deacon, church member, can move those hurdles if God put them there. Not only does he say no small print, but he also says full disclosure. I want to tell you fully exactly what it's going to cost you, and he lays it out in language that's so offensive to people. I can't decide what he's doing. I think partly he's doing it because he wants to discourage some people. I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with somebody about the Christian faith, and when you hear what they think it's about, you realize that is nothing like Scripture, and what they're willing to confess about Jesus is something short of lordship. And so as you talk to them, you get to a point where you say, you know what, you really shouldn't respond. You ever done that? We're so busy wanting to get them in the water, there are some people who shouldn't go there. I had a friend preaches in Memphis, and a very multicultural church. He had somebody from the Middle East come over really teaching him, and the guy said, this lady comes up to him, and he's been studying with him, do I really have to believe Jesus is the only way? No. And he found some way to get around it. And later on, when she found out you do have to believe that, she walked away from the faith. And he chastised himself ever since. There are some things that offend that we can't remove. We just can't. We can't lower the cost, and we can't say to the person, you got to give up all your possessions and then run out. If you just give a few minutes, let's work into this. Jesus let them walk away, and we have to be able to do that too. But then I think maybe he's like the football coach who's trying to give a pep talk to his team on the very first practice. I don't know about this because I never played football. It's pretty obvious to everybody, but I mean, I've heard about this from people. You come to that first practice, and he does a few things, and then he gathers everybody around, and he gets real loud and firm. Now, I'm about to get loud and firm, so don't be shocked. But he's going to look at his football team, and he says, when you come back for that second practice, I want you to know I'm going to take your life. You got to eat football, sleep football, dream football. It's your mama, it's your daddy, it's your brothers. You got to practice 3 times a day in the heat. Your life is mine. And you're like, whoa. At that point, I say, I'm out of here. But a lot of those guys walk out going, ooh, 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 and you're like, what about that is interesting to you? I think maybe Jesus might be saying to these people on this one particular time in Luke 14, I want everything. It's not enough just to make this a neat social club you come to when it's convenient. I want your life. And these people can say no, or they can say, yes, that's a life that matters. I'm not sure what he meant it for. But I want to pay attention to 2 things. I want you to look at verse 28 and verse 31, because these things are first. Verse 28, which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Look at verse 31. I need my reading glasses now. Or what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate whether he's able to take 20,000 with 10,000? The first thing you've got to do is sit down and consider it. This is an interesting picture, but I'll be listening to the radio, Old Country, and I'll be listening to it, and there's this lady, I don't know where she's from, but she comes on, she's an financial advisor, and she says, I know there's a lot of weird things out there about your insurance and all that stuff. You give me a call, we'll sit down with a cup of coffee and puzzle over it together, she says. There's this idea of we sit down to think about something before we ever take a stand. Before you decide and before you make decisions, you sit down and look at the whole thing. And this is what Jesus says, before you follow me, first go home and sit down and think about this first. Because this is not just a knowledge issue. I'm about to go to church camp, and there's going to be a bunch of little kids, and they're going to be able to answer the question, what's baptism for? It's not just a knowledge question about baptism. It's not just do you know what it's for. It's do you know what commitment you're making? Do you know what you're saying about 5 years from now? This is a will matter. I want you to first sit down and I want you to think about this, deliberate, and count out the cost. Do you have enough money to pay off this commitment? Do you have enough willpower to fight to take this war to the very end? Because it is a war. Do you have this? This is not just a knowledge issue, church. This is a will issue. This is a marriage decision where you, before you say I do, remember your vows. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but until death do us part, no matter what happens, we're together, and you can make that covenant. I'm going to tell you, baptism is a lot like marriage, and if your kids aren't old enough to get married, I'm questioning, can they really make a decision like that? Do we baptize too early? Can they really think through this thing? First, sit down and count the cost. It's not first sit down and think, do I know how to build? Do I know how to fight? Of course I know. But you gotta count the cost. It's more than just knowledge. It's willpower. First, sit down and make this decision. Two things, images I think are really helpful. Number one is it's like building a tower and you put up this is a weird thing. It's happening right now in one place I know. This guy put up a business sign, said, coming soon, this business. And he built to a certain point, and then it's froze, and it stayed there forever. Future home of, and it's just sitting there forever unfinished. Kind of an embarrassment, this story says, that you began something, you can't complete it, and everybody knows that you've advertised you can't finish it. And starting the Christian life, I'm going to go and I'm going to be baptized. I'm going to put up a sign that says, this I belong to God, and there's some progress, and suddenly it stops, and you get no closer, you get no further than that foundation of baptism, and it sits there all your life, and people pass your life and say, here's the home of a person belonging to God, and you don't even get beyond the foundation, and it's an embarrassment to you, it's an embarrassment to God. You got to make sure before you start this thing that you're going to see it through to the end. And if you're not sure, you're just getting wet. That's tough teaching. The other image he uses is of a battle, and the reason I like this one, this is more relevant to me. If you're looking for the Christian life to be a place of peace, it's true, it is. You have this wonderful buffer of salvation. But I'm going to tell you something, the battle just starts when you become a believer. The war is just beginning for you, and you can't accept just anything. And so when you, as a believer, are impatient, or when you get angry quickly, you're driving on the highway and you get really angry, or you get angry and you say things you shouldn't, you can never reach a point where you say, well, that's okay, God's just got to accept me the way I am. No, you've got to put yourself aside. I just got angry, and I come over here in a private place, and I say, God, that's unacceptable. I know I'm still saved. You got me covered by the blood of your Son, but it is unacceptable for me to act this way in anger. And I'm not going to accept it. I'm going to have a come to Jesus meeting where I talk about my anger because it's not acceptable, and you get out there and try it again. And one of these days, you progress for a while, and then you go backwards, and you have another flare-up of anger or lust or impatience or gossip, and you realize it, and you don't say, well, that's just the way I am, it's no big deal. No, the Christian knows it is a big deal, and they have to come over here and wage war with themselves, because the number one enemy for the Christian he's warring against is not Satan, it's me. It's me. I am sick of my own sin. I should be further along. I should not have these battles anymore, but I do, and it's frustrating, but I've got to fight them anyway, and I've got to start all over, and I never reach the point where I say, well, that's just who I am, and I'm making peace with it. No, you're not. You are in this for the battle for your life. And if you're not working on something or battling improvement in your own life right now, you're not fully converted. The battle rages. One last thing. I know it's too long already, but you're a captive audience anyway. Here are the highlights, and I want to tell you why the highlights are important. Jesus lays them out. Two things about this. These are the toughest things about making Him Lord of your life. And secondly, if you, this morning, previously, in the future, if you do not respond to Christ and the invitation, it's because of one of these 5 things. I will guarantee it. These are the tough spots. Number 1, relationships. Everyone else, when you make him Lord of your life, everyone else becomes secondary. Jesus says, I didn't come to unite families, Luke chapter 12. I came to split them. That's the Jesus we serve. Tim Keller notes, being a disciple of Jesus means saying to everybody, don't make me choose between you and Jesus. I'll choose Jesus every time. And that may sound like an exaggeration, but it won't feel like it when your son, who's now living with this girl, brings her home for a visit, and you stand there at the door of your house and say, her room's here, your room's here, you will not sleep together in my roof. Then the tension builds. Or maybe families coming in, and they're coming in on a Sunday morning, and you say, the key's under the mat, I'm at church. You mean you're not going to stay home from church to greet me? No. No, because while family's important, lordship's above that. Is that true? Okay, be careful. Is that true? Is that real, or is that just like, well, he didn't really mean that? Did he mean that, church? Does lordship mean above that? It does mean that. I can tell you the first or second funeral I went back to Kennett for was this man I loved dearly. We got him to come to church. We could not get him to respond. And I'm telling you, it was a church-wide project. We prayed everything we knew. We talked as much as we could. And all I could figure was this. The only thing I ever heard from him was, if I really, really, really was converted and became a Christian, there's this friend I've had since high school that we do everything together. We would never be able to do these things together again, and it may cost me that friendship. And until that won't happen, I'll never respond. And he died never responding. Now, while I disagree with his conclusion, he's right. If there's a relationship you're not willing to change and make Jesus Lord even of that, do not come this morning. You don't need to. Because Jesus is pesky with his lordship. Second thing is this, endurance. The way he puts it is, you have a cross to bear in your context, and you have to embrace it. Whatever coming after Jesus demands of you, you must be willing to pay it. It's the same as a wedding vow. So maybe for the rest of your life, this sexual orientation issue you have got to bring it and submit it to the lordship of Christ. You know that's true? You know it's true if you have a special needs child, you have to see that through with a Christian faith. You know if you have a loved one with Alzheimer's, or loved one with bipolar, and as difficult and as frustrating as that is what it means to carry your cross. That you've got this circumstance in your life that maybe others don't have, but you've got to submit it to the lordship of Christ, and you've got to be willing to pay it. Ooh, I don't like saying that because I don't know what that entails. But you know already you'll pay it. Third, there's a cost. You build your life on Christ, he gets meddlesome even in your checkbook. It's an investment. Like if you're a Cardinal fan, if you're a Cub fan, if you're any fan, going to a ball game costs some, and after a while the cost is too great. You're not going to go because it costs too much. There are some people who say, I just can't become a believer because it's going to cost me too much. All right? You're right. There are people who will never become a Christian because of the relationships it will cost them, the endurance it demands, and the cost they'll have to pay. Fourth, effort. You will face opposition, and you'll just have to go through with it. You can't come to peace with the demands of the gospel. You'll have to fight all the time your old self. Fight all the way to the finish. You run, not aimlessly, but you run to finish the race. So you can't give up, and you can't come to peace with certain things. It all falls under his lordship. And finally, possessions. You don't necessarily have to give everything up, but everything is marked God's. There is no mine. I am mine no more, and neither are my possessions. If you have to use them for God, then you do. So this is what I'm telling you. If Cabot ever calls you up and say, we want a Sunday night devotional at your house, use your house to have young people in for a devotional, the answer you give is no way. No, it's yes. That's what he means by being willing to use your possessions. You say, well, they might mess up something. Sure they might. It's not yours anyway. It's not yours anyway. The church will pay you back. But I believe in invitations. I believe people need to be reminded that you have to make a decision. You can't just sit and hear about the Christian faith all your life. You must make a decision. And each time there is an invitation, you do make a decision. But how we develop this is very important. They must be honest. We call people to make a decision to live for Christ. It's the best kind of life to live. It is. But it's not for the dull of mind or weak of heart. It's not just come and be saved and glory in a new relationship with God. It's a call to come and give all and fight and build and put Christ first in every relationship. It will involve crosses, both the Lord's and yours. It's about what you're going to get, and it's also about what you're going to give up. It all has to be included. You have to consider both. And you've been doing that all this morning. And my question is, if you're a believer who's already responded to this gospel and made him Lord of your life, are you willing to continue letting him be Lord? And this week, just putting more and more under his lordship, are you willing to once again battle some more to make your life a little more holy? Are you willing to be billed a little more so the world can see God in your life more and more? Are you willing to do that? I hope you are. It's a decision you're going to make right now. If you've never responded to the gospel, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's rough. It's all-encompassing. But it's the best life you can live no matter what you give up for it. And if you now, this morning, have heard all this and said, I can go for that, that's something I can say. I can call him Lord of my life in front of this group, be immersed in the waters of baptism, and rise, and I can make him Lord in every way. Let him make the decisions for my life. Then why are you waiting? Oh, why not this morning as we stand and sing to encourage you? Have you